You can order the catalytic converter used in the video on the CarParts.com website via the link in the description. Turn off your vehicle's ignition. Set the parking brake. Pull the hood release handle and open the hood. Raise the front of your vehicle high enough, which will allow you to remove the catalytic converter later. We strongly suggest watching our video on how to jack your Ford F-150 safely before carrying out this step. Place the vehicle on the jack stands. Position yourself under the vehicle. Brush and spray the 2 screws that hold the exhaust line to the catalytic converter with penetrating oil. Next, using a ratchet and a 13mm socket, unscrew the 2 screws. You will now have to remove the metal crosspiece that supports the gearbox. Brush the 2 screws in the middle of the crosspiece and lightly spray them with penetrating oil. Then, using a ratchet and an 18mm socket, unscrew the 2 nuts from the gearbox mount. Using a jack, come to rest against the transfer case in order to hold the gearbox assembly in place when removing the metal crosspiece. Brush the 4 nuts located at the end of the metal crosspiece and lightly spray them with penetrating oil. Then, using 2 ratchets, an 18mm socket and a 15mm socket, unscrew the nuts. Then, remove the screws. Before being able to remove the metal crosspiece, you need to remove the 2 screws holding the heat shields on each side of the crosspiece using a ratchet and a 10mm socket. You can now remove the metal crosspiece. Hey, it's Alex from CarParts.com. If you enjoyed this video and want to support us, like, comment, and subscribe. Okay, back to work. You also need to remove the gearbox mount, which is held by 4 screws. In order to remove the 2 screws on the driver's side, you need to remove the drive shaft, which connects the transfer case to the front differential in order to access the 2 screws. On the transfer case side, start by drawing a mark on the drive shaft that will allow you to position it correctly when reassembling. Then, using a ratchet, an extender, and a long 10mm socket, unscrew the 6 retaining screws on the transfer case side. You can rotate the drive shaft as you unscrew to access all the screws. Perform the same operation on the front differential side. Once all the screws have been removed, tap the drive shaft lightly at the ends in order to uncouple it. To access the 2 retaining screws of the driver's side gearbox support, you need to remove the retaining screw of the upper sealant block using a 15mm wrench. Finish the unscrewing by hand. Shift the drive shaft to make it easier for you to access. You can now remove the 2 screws holding the gearbox mount on the driver's side using a ratchet, an extender, and a 15mm socket. Do the same on the passenger side. Using a flathead screwdriver, disconnect the 2 connectors of the oxygen sensors on the driver's side. You can shift the drive shaft to make it easier for you to access. Using a ratchet, 2 large extenders, and a 15mm socket, unscrew the 2 nuts that hold the driver's side catalytic converter to the exhaust manifold. You can shift the drive shaft to facilitate access to the different screws. Using a flathead screwdriver, disconnect the 2 oxygen sensor connectors on the passenger side. Using a ratchet, 2 large extenders, and a 15mm socket, unscrew the 2 nuts that hold the passenger side catalytic converter to the exhaust manifold. You can use a gimbal to help you for the second. We advise you to have someone help you to hold the catalytic converter assembly in place to prevent it from falling when unscrewing. Once the 2 screws have been removed, you can extract the catalytic converter from its location. You can now remove the gearbox mount from the old catalytic converter. You can order the catalytic converter used in the video on the CarParts.com website via the link in the description. Start by putting the new oxygen sensors back in place by screwing them back in using a 22mm wrench. If you want to know which tools and parts we use in this video, just check the description and you'll find everything you need. Each oxygen sensor has a different cable length. Take the example of the old line so as to not invert the sensors. Take the passenger part of the catalytic converter and install it on the exhaust manifold. Briefly retighten the 2 catalytic converter retaining nuts on the exhaust manifold to hold the assembly together. You can coat the junction tube of the 2 catalytic converters with exhaust sealant. Then put on the holding clamp provided in the kit. Then, the second tube. Briefly screw the holding clamp back on. Then, coat the second tube with exhaust sealant. Get the catalytic converter on the driver's side. Install it in its location. Then, thread it into the tube. Briefly retighten the 2 catalytic converter retaining nuts on the exhaust manifold to hold the assembly together. You can now correctly thread the catalytic converter into the tube. Briefly screw the holding clamp back on. The final tightening will take place once all the elements have been put back in place. Replace the gearbox mount on the exhaust line retaining rods. You can purchase the parts we used here by visiting our website at CarParts.com. Reconnect the first oxygen sensor on the passenger side. Then clip it back on its support to prevent the boot from melting and allow the sensor to operate properly. Reconnect the second oxygen sensor, taking care to first pass it through the hole in the heat shield. Reconnect the 2 oxygen sensors on the driver's side. Then clip the cables back in their location. Shift the drive shaft to facilitate access to the screws. Lift the catalytic converter assembly in order to be able to replace the gearbox mount retaining screws. First, screw the 2 screws on the passenger side by hand. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Tighten the 2 screws on the driver's side. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Refit the screw retaining the upper sealant block. Coat the junction between the exhaust line and the catalytic converter with exhaust sealant. Screw the 2 holding screws back in. You can now finish the tightening of the 2 holding clamps with the torque wrench. Then, finish the tightening of the catalytic converter on the exhaust manifold on the passenger side with the torque wrench. Do the same on the driver's side. Replace the drive shaft on the front differential and on the transfer case, following the markings you made during disassembly. Then, tighten the screws on each side. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Brush and grease the location of the metal crosspiece. Replace the metal crosspiece. Then, tighten the 4 screws. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Tighten the 2 gearbox mount retaining nuts. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Tighten the 2 heat shield retaining screws on the metal crosspiece. You can now lower the jack and put the gearbox assembly on the metal crosspiece. Then you can rest your vehicle on the ground. Operation complete.